The streets of downtown Ridgeview pulsed with the rhythm of rush hour. The air heavy with the hum of conversations, the occasional honk of car horns, and the rhythmic clicks of hurried footsteps. Ethan Reed clutched his worn leather briefcase as he weaved through the sea of suits and smartphones. His mind already drifting to the solace of his modest apartment. It had been another grueling day at Avalon Industries, where he worked as a marketing strategist, juggling deadlines, client demands, and office politics. Ethan had always been a man of routine. His days were a carefully curated schedule of work, errands, and the occasional indulgence in a good book or a late-night documentary. Life was predictable, safe, and, at times, achingly monotonous. He longed for something more, a way to make a difference beyond drafting ad campaigns and optimizing market strategies. But like many dreams, this one stayed tucked away, filed under someday. Turning onto a quieter street, Ethan noticed something unusual amidst the urban chaos. A solitary figure sat on the sidewalk, her presence stark against the backdrop of the bustling city. She was a woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, her posture upright despite the threadbare jacket draped over her shoulders. Her dark, curly hair framed a face marked by resilience and weariness in equal measure. Ethan's pace slowed as his eyes fell on the cardboard sign propped up beside her, "Fallen on hard times. Any help appreciated." He wasn't the type to stop for strangers on the street, let alone engage with them. But something about her, the quiet dignity in the way she held herself, the piercing determination in her gaze, compelled him to pause. "Excuse me," he began hesitantly, his voice softer than he'd intended. Are you all right?" The woman looked up, her deep brown eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him aback. "As all right as one can be," she replied evenly, her voice clear and articulate. Given the circumstances, Ethan shifted his weight awkwardly. "I'm Ethan," he offered, extending a hand before realizing the gesture might be inappropriate. To his surprise, she took it, her grip firm despite her frail appearance. "Amara," she said simply, a faint trace of amusement in her tone. Ethan nodded, searching for words. "Amara, I don't mean to intrude, but how did you end up here?" A shadow crossed her face. And for a moment, Ethan regretted asking. But then Amara spoke, her voice measured, tinged with a mix of sadness and defiance. "Life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you," she said with a rueful smile. "One moment, you're standing tall. The next, you're scrambling to pick up the pieces." She didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't press her. Instead, he found himself drawn to her strength. The way she spoke with such clarity despite her circumstances. He crouched down to her level, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked earnestly. Amara studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "That depends," she said finally, her tone cautious but not unkind. "Are you offering a handout? Or a hand-up?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the distinction. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I'd like to try." Amara's lips quirked into a small, reluctant smile. "That's a rare thing, Ethan. Most people just walk by without a second glance." Ethan felt a swell of determination. "I mean it," he said. "If there's a way I can help, tell me." Amara hesitated, then gestured to her sign. "I need more than spare change," she said. "I need a chance to start over." The words struck a chord with Ethan, echoing his own unspoken longing for change. Before he could second-guess himself, an idea formed in his mind. "There's a company gala next week," he said, the words tumbling out faster than he could think them through. "It's a networking event, and employees are supposed to bring a guest. Would you be interested in going? It could be a chance to meet people, make connections." Amara stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "You're inviting a homeless woman to a corporate gala?" Ethan flushed. "When you put it that way, it sounds crazy," he admitted, "but you don't seem like just anyone. Amara, I think you'd fit in." Amara's eyes narrowed, skeptical. "I don't have anything to wear," she pointed out. "I'll take care of that," Ethan said quickly, "if you're willing to give it a shot." For a long moment, Amara said nothing, then she nodded, a spark of curiosity lighting her eyes. "All right, Ethan, I'll take you up on your offer. But on one condition." "Name it," Ethan said. "If this works out," Amara said firmly, "I'll find a way to repay you. I don't take charity lightly." Ethan nodded, his heart racing with equal parts excitement and uncertainty. Deal. As they shook hands to seal their unusual agreement, Ethan felt a strange sense of anticipation. He had no idea what he'd just gotten himself into. But one thing was certain. This encounter was going to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The following morning, Ethan woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The previous night's conversation with Amara replayed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a decision that could set something extraordinary in motion. Ethan took his first step in the plan by calling in a favor from a friend who ran a modest boutique called Second Chances. Tucked away in a quiet corner of Ridgeview, it was a cozy store known for affordable but elegant clothing, often catering to those looking for a fresh start. When he explained his situation, the store owner, Harper, didn't ask too many questions, only chuckling lightly. "Well, Ethan," Harper said over the phone, "you've always been a little unconventional. Bring her in. I'll make sure she's taken care of." Later that afternoon, Ethan and Amara stood outside the boutique. Amara glanced up at the shop sign, her expression unreadable. "Second Chances," she said softly. "How fitting." Ethan smiled. "I thought so too. Ready?" Amara hesitated, the first sign of uncertainty Ethan had seen from her since they'd met. "I don't know, Ethan," she murmured. "I feel out of place." "You belong here as much as anyone," Ethan reassured her. "Let's just take it one step at a time." The bell above the door jingled as they entered. And Harper, a woman in her 50s with warm eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them. She immediately gave Amara an appraising look, not unkind, but searching. "You must be Amara," Harper said, extending a hand. "Ethan told me a bit about you. Let's see what we can do." Amara nodded cautiously, and Harper wasted no time, leading her to a rack of dresses. The fabrics ranged from sleek silks to soft chiffons, in colors that seemed to shimmer under the boutique's soft lighting. "I don't know where to start," Amara admitted, her fingers brushing the edge of a deep blue dress. "That one," Harper said decisively. "The color will bring out your eyes. Go try it on." Amara vanished into the fitting room while Ethan hovered awkwardly by the counter. Harper turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "You've got your work cut out for you with this one," she said, "but I think you're onto something special." Before Ethan could respond, the changing room door opened. Amara stepped out, and for a moment, Ethan was struck speechless. The deep blue dress hugged her figure perfectly, its modest neckline and flowing hem exuding sophistication. Amara's posture had changed too. She stood taller, her shoulders back, her head held high. For the first time since they'd met, there was a hint of confidence in her demeanor. "Well?" Amara asked, her voice tinged with nerves. "What do you think?" Ethan found his voice. "You look incredible," he said honestly. Amara's cheeks flushed, and she gave a small, almost shy smile. "I feel different," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've worn anything like this." Harper clapped her hands. "That's the one," she declared. "We'll pair it with some simple accessories and heels, and you'll be ready to turn heads." As Harper finalized the outfit, Amara looked at Ethan. "You're really going all out for this, aren't you?" Ethan shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I told you I wanted to help." Amara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. I'm not sure what I've done to deserve this, but thank you." The sincerity in her voice struck a chord in Ethan, and he realized just how much this moment meant to her. Over the next few days, Ethan continued to help Amara prepare for the gala. He arranged for her to get a haircut at a small salon where his sister worked. Amelia, his sister, was immediately taken with Amara. "You've got great bone structure," Amelia said as she combed through Amara's curls. "Once we're done, you're going to look like you stepped out of a magazine." Amara laughed softly, a sound that seemed to surprise even herself. "I'll settle for looking like I belong." "You already do," Amelia said firmly. "This is just polishing the diamond." By the time the stylist was finished, Amara's hair was swept into an elegant updo, with a few loose curls framing her face. Ethan was once again floored by the transformation. Amara looked every bit as poised and confident as the executives he worked with daily. "That's it," Amelia said, stepping back to admire her work. "You're ready for your close-up." Amara turned to Ethan, her expression a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "I don't know what I expected, but this is beyond anything I imagined. Thank you." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he couldn't quite explain. "You're welcome, Amara. I think you're going to make quite an impression." The day of the gala arrived. bringing with it a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation for both Ethan and Amara. Ethan, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that his sister had helped him pick out, stood in front of the mirror in his modest apartment, adjusting his tie for the third time. His thoughts kept drifting to Amara, wondering how she was feeling and if she had second thoughts about the evening. A knock at the door interrupted his musings. Ethan opened it to find Amara standing there, a vision of elegance and poise. She wore the deep blue dress they had picked out, paired with silver heels and a simple clutch. Her hair, styled in an intricate updo, shimmered under the hallway lights. For a moment, Ethan could only stare. "Wow," he said finally, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You look incredible." Amara smiled, a mixture of confidence and vulnerability. "Thank you. I feel like a different person." Ethan offered his arm. "Ready?" Amara hesitated for only a moment before linking her arm through his. "Ready." The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Regal Crest Hotel, an opulent space adorned with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. The crowd was a sea of finely dressed guests, their laughter and conversation blending with the soft strains of a string quartet. As Ethan and Amara stepped through the large oak doors, a noticeable hush fell over the room. Heads turned, whispers spread, and eyes followed them as they moved further inside. Ethan felt a wave of self-consciousness but quickly pushed it aside. He glanced at Amara, expecting to see nerves, but she carried herself with remarkable composure. "You're stealing the show," Ethan whispered, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Good," Amara replied with a wry smile. "Let's give them something to talk about." The first hour of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversations. Ethan introduced Amara to several of his colleagues, who were instantly captivated by her charm and intelligence. Amara's ability to navigate conversations with wit and poise surprised even Ethan. One particularly curious colleague, Rebecca, leaned in close and whispered, "Where did you find her?" "Ethan? She's stunning." Ethan chuckled nervously. "Let's just say it's an unusual story." As the evening wore on, Ethan and Amara found themselves approached by senior executives, including Victor Sinclair, the CEO of Avalon Industries. Victor was a tall, imposing man in his early 60s, his silver hair and piercing eyes giving him an air of authority. "Ethan," Victor said warmly, extending a hand, "good to see you here. And who is your companion?" Before Ethan could respond, Amara stepped forward, her hand extended. "Amara," she said confidently. Victor shook her hand, his sharp gaze flickering with curiosity. "Amara, it's a pleasure. I hope you're enjoying the evening." "I am," Amara replied smoothly. "It's a remarkable event." For a moment, Victor's eyes lingered on her face, his expression unreadable. "You seem familiar," he said, his voice quieter now. "Have we met before?" The question hung in the air, and Ethan felt the tension ripple through Amara. She hesitated, but only briefly. "I don't believe so," she said lightly. "Perhaps I just have one of those faces." Victor nodded, though a shadow of doubt crossed his features. "Perhaps," he murmured, before excusing himself to mingle with other guests. Ethan turned to Amara, lowering his voice. "Are you okay?" Amara nodded, though her expression was guarded. "I'm fine. Let's keep moving." Later in the evening, as the gala reached its peak, Victor Sinclair took the stage to give his customary speech. The crowd gathered near the front, their conversations quieting as he began. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice commanding the room, "thank you for joining us tonight. This event is not just a celebration of Avalon Industries' success but a testament to the incredible people who make it all possible." As he spoke, Ethan noticed Amara standing unusually still, her gaze fixed on Victor with an intensity that bordered on discomfort. He leaned in. "Amara? Is everything?" Before he could finish, Victor's eyes swept the room, and froze when they landed on Amara. His words faltered, a flicker of shock breaking through his composed exterior. The microphone picked up his sharp intake of breath. "Elizabeth?" he said, barely above a whisper, but loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. The room fell silent, every eye turning to Victor and then to Amara. Ethan's breath caught. "Elizabeth?" he echoed, his voice faint. "Amara, no." Elizabeth stepped forward, her chin held high, though her expression betrayed a whirlwind of emotions, fear, hope, and determination. "Hello, Victor," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hushed ballroom. Victor descended the stage in 3 long strides, his eyes never leaving hers. "Is it really you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "After all this time?" Elizabeth nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's me." Victor reached her, his hands hovering as if unsure whether to touch her or if she might vanish. Finally, he pulled her into a tight embrace, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he murmured. The room erupted into murmurs, the guests struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before them. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing and hearing. The woman he had met on the street, the woman he had helped, was Victor Sinclair's long-lost wife? The ballroom, which just moments ago was filled with laughter and light-hearted conversation, now buzzed with whispers and speculation. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his thoughts a jumbled mess as he watched Victor Sinclair hold Elizabeth tightly, as though afraid she might vanish again. Elizabeth, Amara, as Ethan had known her, stood still in Victor's embrace for a moment before gently pulling back. Her face was a mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and the faintest hint of guilt. Victor took a step back, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "Where have you been all these years?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. "Why did you leave?" Elizabeth glanced around the room, her eyes briefly meeting Ethan's before returning to Victor. "It's a long story," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "And it's one I'd rather tell in private." Victor nodded, his jaw tight. "Of course, we have much to discuss." As the murmurs in the room grew louder, Victor turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is unexpected, and I appreciate your understanding. Please continue to enjoy the evening. My wife and I need a moment." The words sent another ripple of shock through the crowd. His wife? Ethan felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The woman he had met on the street, the woman he thought he was helping to rebuild her life, was not only deeply connected to Avalon Industries but was its CEO's wife. Victor gestured for Elizabeth to follow him, and she hesitated. Before leaving, she turned to Ethan, her eyes full of meaning. "Ethan," she said softly, "thank you. We'll talk soon." With that, she walked away with Victor, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the ballroom, the eyes of nearly every guest fixed on him. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Ethan tried to navigate conversations with colleagues and guests, all of whom were eager to pry into what had just happened. "Ethan, how do you know her?" one colleague pressed. "Did you know she was married to Victor?" another asked. Ethan's standard response was a polite but firm, "It's a long story," though in truth, he didn't have the answers himself. By the time the event began winding down, he was emotionally drained. At the bar, Rebecca approached him, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Ethan," she said, handing him a glass of water, "you've got to tell me what's going on. Who is she? And how did you end up bringing her to this?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know where to begin," he admitted. "I met her on the street a few days ago. She told me her name was Amara. I had no idea who she really was." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You met her on the street? And now she's Victor Sinclair's wife? That's incredible." "Incredible is one word for it," Ethan muttered, taking a sip of water. His mind was spinning, trying to piece together the implications of what he'd learned. Who was Elizabeth Sinclair, really? And why had she been living on the streets? The next morning, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and staring blankly at his laptop. He had slept fitfully, his dreams filled with disjointed images of the previous night. The knock at his door startled him. When he opened it, he found a sharply dressed man holding an envelope. "Mr. Ethan Reed?" the man asked. "Yes," Ethan replied, puzzled. The man handed him the envelope. "Mr. Sinclair would like to meet with you this afternoon. The details are inside." Before Ethan could ask any questions, the man nodded politely and walked away, leaving him standing in the doorway with the envelope in hand. Back at the table, Ethan opened it to find a neatly written note on Avalon Industries' letterhead. "I would like to extend my gratitude for your role in reuniting me with my wife, Elizabeth. She has spoken highly of you and the kindness you showed her during difficult times. Please join us at my office this afternoon at 3 p.m. There are matters I would like to discuss with you personally. Sincerely." Ethan's stomach tightened as he read the note. What could Victor Sinclair want to discuss with him? Was he angry? Grateful? Suspicious? He had no idea what to expect. At precisely 3 p.m., Ethan found himself stepping into the glass and steel headquarters of Avalon Industries. The building, a symbol of modernity and power, loomed above the bustling city streets. Ethan had worked for the company for years, but this was the first time he'd been summoned to the executive floor. A sharply dressed assistant greeted him and led him to a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Ridgeview. Victor stood by the window, his back to the room, while Elizabeth sat on a leather sofa, her posture poised but relaxed. "Ethan," Victor said, turning to face him, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Ethan sat in an armchair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He glanced at Elizabeth, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. Victor began, "Ethan, first and foremost, I want to thank you. I understand you were the one who helped Elizabeth when she reappeared in our lives." Ethan nodded. "I didn't know who she was at the time. I just wanted to help." "That's what makes your actions all the more commendable," Victor said. "Most people would have walked by without a second thought. You didn't." Elizabeth leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Ethan, you showed me a kindness I didn't expect. You reminded me that there are people who still care, who see others as human beings rather than problems to be ignored. For that, I'll always be grateful." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I'm glad I could help," he said softly. "But, I have to admit, I don't fully understand. Why were you on the street in the first place?" Elizabeth took a deep breath. "It's a long story, Ethan, but the short version is that I needed to step away from my life. I needed to strip everything down to its core and understand what truly mattered." Victor interjected, "And now that she's back, we both want to make changes, both in our lives and in the company. That brings us to you." Ethan blinked. "Me?" Victor nodded. "You've proven that you're someone who acts with integrity and compassion. Elizabeth and I want to start a new initiative at Avalon Industries, a program to address homelessness and provide opportunities for those in need. We believe you're the right person to lead it." Ethan's jaw dropped. I'm just a marketing guy," he stammered. "I don't know the first thing about running a program like that." Elizabeth smiled. "You know more than you think. Ethan, you saw me when no one else did. You extended a hand without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of leadership this initiative needs." Victor added, "You'll have the full resources of Avalon Industries behind you. This is an opportunity to make a real difference, not just in this company, but in the lives of countless people." Ethan sat back, his mind racing. The offer was overwhelming, but the thought of making a meaningful impact was deeply appealing. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it." Elizabeth's smile widened. "I knew you would." Victor extended his hand. "Welcome to your new role. Ethan, let's change some lives." Ethan stepped out of Avalon Industries headquarters feeling both exhilarated and overwhelmed. He had just accepted a role that would transform his career and possibly his life. The enormity of the task ahead began to settle in as he walked the bustling streets of Ridgeview. This wasn't just another marketing project. It was about changing lives. Starting with the same streets he had walked so many times, including the one where he had first met Elizabeth. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Ethan's first step was to assemble a team. Victor and Elizabeth had provided him with a substantial budget and access to Avalon Industries resources. But it was up to Ethan to turn the vision into reality. Ethan spent hours poring over applications, resumes, and recommendations. He was looking for individuals who not only had the right skills but also shared his passion for making a difference. By the end of the week, he had hired a small but dedicated team. Maya Green, a social worker with years of experience working in shelters and community programs. Eric Tran, a data analyst who had left a high-paying tech job to pursue more meaningful work. Sophia Martinez, a communications specialist with a knack for storytelling and public relations. James Riley, a logistics expert who had a reputation for turning chaos into order. Ethan called the first team meeting in a bright conference room at Avalon's headquarters. The atmosphere buzzed with energy as the team members introduced themselves and shared their motivations for joining the project. "Before we get started," Ethan began, looking around at his team, "I want to thank each of you for being here. This isn't just another corporate initiative. It's about creating real, lasting change. And to do that, we need to start with the people who need us most." He outlined the plan to launch Avalon Lift, a comprehensive program focused on job training, mental health support, and transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness. The goal was ambitious, but Ethan was determined. The team dove into action. Maya began reaching out to local shelters and advocacy groups to establish partnerships. Eric analyzed data to identify the areas in Ridgeview with the highest concentration of homelessness. Sophia crafted a compelling narrative for the program, preparing press releases and social media campaigns to generate public interest and support. James worked on securing the space for the program's first community center. Ethan, meanwhile, met with community leaders and potential stakeholders. He visited shelters and soup kitchens, talking to people to better understand their needs and challenges. One evening, as he sat with a group of men and women at a local shelter, an older man named Gerald shared his story. "I was a machinist for 20 years, Gerald said, his voice rough but steady. Then the factory shut down. I couldn't find work, lost my home, and ended up here. I want to work. I'm not afraid of hard work, but it's hard to get back on your feet when no one will give you a chance." Ethan listened intently, jotting down notes. Gerald's words echoed what he had heard from many others. The lack of opportunity was a bigger barrier than the lack of desire. That night, as he walked home, Ethan's mind churned with ideas. The program had to do more than offer temporary relief. It needed to create pathways for sustainable independence. Despite the momentum, the project was not without its challenges. Some executives at Avalon Industries questioned the initiative's cost and impact on the company's bottom line. Ethan found himself in heated meetings, defending the program's value. "This isn't just charity," Ethan argued during one particularly tense meeting. "It's an investment in our community. When we lift people up, we strengthen the economy, reduce crime, and create a better environment for everyone, including our employees." Elizabeth, who had joined several meetings as an advocate for the initiative, backed Ethan's arguments with her characteristic calm and conviction. "If we truly want Avalon Industries to be a leader, we must lead not just in profit but in purpose," she said. Her words carried weight, and slowly, resistance began to give way. After months of planning, the first Avalon Lift Center was ready to open its doors. The building, located in one of Ridgeview's most underserved neighborhoods, was a renovated warehouse transformed into a vibrant community hub. It featured classrooms for job training, private rooms for counseling, and a communal space where participants could connect and share their experiences. On the day of the grand opening, the atmosphere was electric. Local officials, community leaders, and Avalon employees gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ethan stood at the podium, scanning the crowd. He spotted familiar faces. Victor and Elizabeth stood together, pride evident in their expressions. He also noticed Gerald, the machinist he had spoken to weeks earlier, standing near the front. Ethan took a deep breath and began his speech. "Today isn't just about opening a building. It's about opening doors to opportunity, hope, and a better future. This center is proof that when we come together, we can create meaningful change." As he spoke, applause rippled through the crowd. When he cut the ribbon, a wave of emotion washed over him. This was more than just a milestone, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. In the weeks that followed, the Avalon Lift Center became a beacon of hope in the community. Gerald was one of the first participants to complete a training program, landing a job at a local manufacturing plant. His success story became a symbol of what the program could achieve. Word of the initiative spread, attracting media attention and sparking interest from other companies. Ethan found himself fielding calls from CEOs and nonprofits eager to replicate the model. Despite the growing recognition, Ethan stayed grounded. He continued to visit the center regularly, talking to participants and listening to their stories. It was their resilience and determination that fueled his own. The success of the first Avalon Lift Center was undeniable. Within months, it had placed dozens of participants into stable jobs, connected families with transitional housing, and created a supportive community where people could regain their footing. Stories like Gerald's were multiplying, each one a testament to the program's potential. Ethan knew they couldn't stop there. The demand for similar services was overwhelming, and interest in expanding the program was pouring in from across the state and beyond. Ethan sat in a conference room with his core team, Maya, Eric, Sophia, and James. Charts and diagrams covered the walls. detailing the results of their pilot center and outlining the blueprint for expansion. "We've proven the model works," Ethan began, addressing the group. "Now we need to figure out how to replicate it without losing the personal touch that makes it successful." Maya leaned forward, her notebook filled with ideas. "The key will be building partnerships with local organizations in each new area. They already have the trust of the communities we want to help." Eric nodded. "Agreed. And we'll need to adapt our approach for different regions. What works in Ridgeview might not work in other cities." Sophia tapped her pen on the table. "We'll also need a strong communication strategy to attract support and funding. The more people hear about our success, the easier it'll be to scale." Ethan listened carefully, nodding at their insights. "Let's start with 3 new locations," he said. "We'll use them to refine the process before we go statewide. James, can you find us potential sites?" "Already on it," James replied, flipping through a folder. "I've identified 3 cities with high need and strong local networks: Brookside, Clayton, and Harbor City." "Perfect," Ethan said, feeling a surge of excitement. "Let's make it happen." As the team worked tirelessly to expand, new challenges emerged. Securing funding for the additional centers proved to be an uphill battle. While Avalon Industries had provided seed money for the pilot program, scaling up required far more resources than they'd anticipated. Ethan spent hours meeting with potential donors and pitching the initiative to corporate sponsors. Some were enthusiastic, eager to align their brands with a program that was generating so much positive attention. Others were skeptical, questioning whether the results could be replicated on a larger scale. One particularly grueling meeting with a major foundation left Ethan frustrated. The foundation's director, a sharp-eyed woman named Claudia, had peppered him with tough questions. "How do you plan to maintain accountability as you grow?" she asked. "How will you measure success beyond anecdotal stories?" Ethan took a deep breath, drawing on everything he'd learned over the past few months. "We're implementing a comprehensive tracking system," he explained. "It will measure job placements, housing stability, and long-term outcomes for participants. But this program isn't just about numbers, it's about people. And when you meet them, when you hear their stories, you'll understand why this matters." Claudia studied him for a moment, then smiled. "You're passionate. I'll give you that. Let's schedule a site visit. If the results match your enthusiasm, we might have something to discuss." Amid the whirlwind of activity, Ethan found himself spending more time with Elizabeth. She had become an unofficial advisor to the initiative, offering guidance and encouragement whenever he needed it. Her experience, both as someone who had lived on the streets and as a former executive's wife, gave her a unique perspective that Ethan valued deeply. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan and Elizabeth found themselves alone in the now quiet Avalon Lift Center. They sat in the communal space, sipping coffee and reflecting on the journey so far. "You've done something incredible here, Ethan," Elizabeth said, her voice warm with admiration. "You've taken an idea and turned it into a lifeline for so many people." Ethan shrugged, though her words filled him with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you and Victor. Your support made this possible." Elizabeth smiled, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Victor deserves a lot of credit," she said, "but this was your vision. Ethan, don't forget that." There was a pause, the kind that invited unspoken thoughts to surface. Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Elizabeth, I've been meaning to ask. What made you decide to come back? After everything, why now?" Elizabeth looked out the window, her expression distant. "I left because I needed to find myself," she said slowly. "I needed to understand what it meant to lose everything, to feel invisible. But when I met you, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, the power of kindness. You didn't see me as a problem to be solved. You saw me as a person. And that gave me the courage to come back." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I'm glad you did," he said quietly. "The world, and this program, is better with you in it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the bond between them deepening with each shared moment. The expansion of Avalon Lift was officially announced at a press conference hosted by Avalon Industries. Media outlets from across the state attended, eager to cover the story of a corporate initiative that was making a real difference. Victor Sinclair opened the event, praising Ethan's leadership and sharing the vision for the program's future. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he took a deep breath and stepped to the podium. This initiative started with a simple act of kindness. He began. I met someone on the street who needed a hand. Not just to get by, but to rebuild her life. That moment changed both of us. And it showed me the incredible potential we all have to make a difference. He looked out at the crowd. His voice steady. Avalon Lift isn't just about providing resources. It's about restoring dignity, hope, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. And this is only the beginning. The room erupted in applause. And Ethan felt a swell of pride and determination. The journey was far from over. But with every step forward, he felt more certain that they were on the right path. The launch of the 3 new Avalon Lift centers in Brookside, Clayton, and Harbor City marked a significant milestone for the initiative. Each center opened to great fanfare, with ribbon-cutting ceremonies attended by local officials, community leaders, and Avalon Industries executives. The energy was palpable, the optimism infectious, and Ethan found himself buoyed by the momentum. But as the centers began their operations, Ethan quickly realized that scaling up wasn't without its challenges. Brookside's center faced an issue with local resistance. Despite the program's noble intentions, some residents viewed the center as an eyesore, fearing it would bring undesirable elements to their neighborhood. Ethan attended a tense town hall meeting where concerned residents voiced their frustrations. "I sympathize with the homeless," one man said, his arms crossed defensively. "But why does it have to be in our backyard? This will hurt property values and make people feel unsafe." Ethan stood, calm but resolute. "I understand your concerns," he said, his voice steady. "But I ask you to consider this. These centers don't just help individuals experiencing homelessness, they help the entire community. When people find stability and jobs, crime decreases, and neighborhoods improve." He shared success stories from the Ridgeview Center, highlighting people like Gerald, who had found work and housing through the program. "This isn't about creating a burden," Ethan concluded, "it's about creating a solution." While not everyone was convinced, the meeting ended with a sense of cautious optimism. Ethan knew it would take time to win over the community, but he was determined to keep working at it. The Clayton Center faced its own hurdles. Staffing shortages plagued the center from the start, leaving existing employees overworked and participants underserved. Maya visited the site to assess the situation and reported back with a grim update. "We're stretched too thin," she said during a team meeting. "We need more counselors and case managers. But the funding isn't there." Ethan frowned, feeling the weight of the situation. "We can't let the quality of the program suffer. Let's focus on fundraising and reaching out to volunteers." Sophia jumped in. "I can ramp up our PR efforts and pitch to local philanthropists. Clayton has a strong network of charitable organizations. We just need to tap into it." Ethan nodded. "Let's prioritize this. Every center matters." In Harbor City, the issue was different but no less challenging. The center had trouble attracting participants, as many people experiencing homelessness in the area were distrustful of corporate-backed initiatives. To address this, Ethan decided to visit Harbor City himself. He spent days walking the streets, talking to people, and building relationships. During one such visit, he met a woman named Carla, a local activist who had been working with the homeless population for years. "I've seen programs like yours come and go," Carla said bluntly. "Big promises, little follow-through. Why should this be any different?" "Because this isn't just a PR stunt," Ethan replied earnestly. "I've met these people. I've seen their struggles. This is personal for me." Carla studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll help you. But if you let these people down, I'll be the first to call you out." With Carla's endorsement, trust began to build, and more participants started showing up at the Harbor City Center. Amid the chaos of managing 3 new centers, Ethan's relationship with Elizabeth continued to grow. She had become his sounding board, offering insights and encouragement whenever he felt overwhelmed. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Ethan and Elizabeth sat in the quiet of the Ridgeview Center. The lights were dim, the hum of the city audible through the windows. "You've come a long way, Ethan," Elizabeth said softly. "I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled, though his expression was tinged with exhaustion. "Some days it feels like we're barely holding it together." "That's because you care," Elizabeth said. "If it were easy, it wouldn't mean as much." Ethan hesitated, then spoke. "Elizabeth, I've been wondering, what's next for you? You've been such a big part of this initiative. But what do you want for yourself?" Elizabeth looked thoughtful. For now, this is enough. Helping you build this program. Seeing lives change. It's given me a sense of purpose I haven't felt in years." There was a pause, and Ethan felt a warmth in her gaze. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want, Ethan?" He looked at her, the question lingering in the air. "I want to see this through," he said finally, "to prove that compassion can be the foundation for real change." As the months went on, the centers began to stabilize. Brookside's community grew more supportive, thanks to outreach efforts and visible success stories. In Clayton, Sophia's fundraising campaigns brought in enough donations to hire additional staff. And in Harbor City, Carla's partnership became a cornerstone of the center's success. The program was gaining national attention, with media outlets praising Avalon Lift as a model for addressing homelessness and poverty. Ethan found himself invited to conferences and panels, sharing the initiative's story and encouraging others to follow suit. Just when things seemed to be on the upswing, an unexpected scandal threatened to derail everything. A disgruntled former employee leaked internal documents suggesting that Avalon Industries had initially resisted the program due to financial concerns. The story spread quickly, with headlines questioning the company's motives. Ethan was devastated. He knew the documents were from the early stages of planning when resistance had been genuine but ultimately overcome. The media, however, latched onto the narrative of corporate greed. Victor Sinclair called an emergency meeting. With Elizabeth and Ethan present, "We need to address this head-on," Victor said. "Transparency is key." Ethan agreed. "Let's hold a press conference. I'll take responsibility for addressing the questions." Elizabeth placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "We'll stand by you," she said. "The truth will prevail." The leaked documents threatened to overshadow everything Ethan and the team had worked so hard to achieve. Headlines like, "Is Avalon Lift just corporate PR?" and "Homeless Initiative Raises Questions About Corporate Integrity" dominated the news cycle. Public trust in the program wavered, and Ethan felt the weight of the crisis pressing down on him. Ethan, Elizabeth, and Victor decided to address the issue with complete transparency. A press conference was scheduled, and the days leading up to it were filled with preparation. Sophia worked tirelessly to craft a statement that was honest yet reassuring. Maya and James provided data and testimonials from participants to back up the program's success. Elizabeth sat with Ethan late into the night, helping him rehearse his responses to potential questions. On the day of the conference, the Ridgeview Avalon Lift Center was transformed into a media hub. Cameras flashed as reporters gathered, eager for answers. Ethan stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath, meeting the eyes of the crowd. "Good afternoon," he began. "Thank you for being here today." He paused, letting the room settle before continuing. The leaked documents reflect discussions that took place during the early stages of planning for Avalon Lift. At the time, there were legitimate concerns about the financial feasibility of the program. However, those concerns were met with a commitment to doing what was right, not just what was easy. Ethan's voice grew steadier as he spoke. Since its launch, Avalon Lift has helped hundreds of people find jobs, housing, and hope. This isn't a PR campaign, it's a movement. A movement built on the belief that compassion and business can coexist. He gestured to a screen behind him, where a video played showcasing success stories. Gerald, the machinist who now ran a team at his factory, Tanya, a young mother who had started her own catering business, and Carla, the Harbor City activist who had joined the program as a community liaison. "These are the faces of Avalon Lift," Ethan said, his voice full of conviction. "And they are proof that this initiative is more than words on a page." The room erupted into applause. When the Q&A began, Ethan answered questions with clarity and sincerity, emphasizing the program's impact and Avalon Industries' commitment to transparency. Elizabeth and Victor stood behind him, their presence a quiet but powerful show of support. The press conference turned the tide. Articles began to shift in tone, highlighting the program's successes and the team's efforts to address concerns. Ethan and Sophia doubled down on outreach, inviting journalists to tour the centers and meet participants. One such visit by Claudia, the Skeptical Foundation director, proved pivotal. After spending a day at the Ridgeview Center, she called Ethan. "I was wrong about you," she admitted. "This program is the real deal. The foundation will be making a significant donation to support your expansion." Ethan felt a surge of relief and gratitude. The storm wasn't over, but the program had weathered its first major test. As Avalon Lift regained its footing, the initiative's reputation soared. Ethan was invited to speak at a national conference on homelessness, sharing the program's innovative model and its focus on dignity and opportunity. The speech earned a standing ovation and sparked interest from organizations across the country. Back in Ridgeview, the team worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of expansion. Ethan often found himself reflecting on how far they had come, and how much further there was to go. One evening, as he stood in the quiet of the Ridgeview Center, Elizabeth joined him. "You're thinking again," she teased, a soft smile playing on her lips. Ethan chuckled. "Always. It's hard not to with so much happening." Elizabeth studied him, her expression thoughtful. "You've built something extraordinary, Ethan. I hope you know that." He turned to her, his gaze steady. "I didn't do it alone. You've been a part of this every step of the way." Elizabeth hesitated, then spoke. "I've been thinking about what's next for me. This program, this journey, it's helped me find myself again. But it's also reminded me of the responsibilities I left behind." Ethan nodded, understanding. "You're thinking of stepping back?" "Yes," Elizabeth said softly. "Victor and I have a lot to rebuild, personally and professionally. But I'll always be here if you need me." Ethan felt a pang of sadness but also immense gratitude. "I'll miss having you here," he admitted, "but I'm glad you're finding your path." Elizabeth smiled, her eyes shining. "And you, Ethan, you're exactly where you're meant to be." With Elizabeth stepping back, Ethan took on even more responsibility, leading the program into its next phase. New centers opened in cities across the country, each one tailored to the unique needs of its community. The model became a blueprint for other organizations, inspiring a wave of similar initiatives. Through it all, Ethan remained grounded, never losing sight of the program's core mission: to see people, not problems, and to extend a hand where it was needed most. A year after the launch of Avalon Lift, Ethan stood in front of a packed auditorium, accepting an award for his leadership and innovation. As he looked out at the crowd, he thought of the countless people who had contributed to the journey, his team, Victor and Elizabeth, and most importantly, the participants whose resilience had inspired everything. "This award isn't just for me," Ethan said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's for every person who has ever believed in second chances. Compassion isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And when we extend it, we don't just change lives, we change the world." As the applause echoed around him, Ethan felt a deep sense of purpose. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter on the street was far from over. It was only the beginning. Ethan's leadership of Avalon Lift had not only reshaped communities but had also reshaped him. The once routine-driven marketing executive was now a confident, visionary leader. Yet, even with the program's growing success, Ethan remained humble, aware that his work was part of a much larger story. The ripple effects of Avalon Lift were undeniable. Cities across the country were adopting similar models, inspired by Ethan's belief in the power of compassion and opportunity. Still, Ethan knew there was more to be done. At a board meeting with Victor and the senior leadership of Avalon Industries, the discussion turned to the future of the initiative. The room was abuzz with excitement as Ethan presented his vision. "I believe we've only scratched the surface," Ethan said, gesturing to a map of the United States. "What if we expanded Avalon Lift internationally? There are countless communities around the world that could benefit from this model." Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That's an ambitious goal, Ethan." "It is," Ethan agreed, "but we've proven that this works. If we partner with international organizations and leverage local expertise, we can adapt the model to fit different cultural and economic contexts." Elizabeth, who had joined the meeting as a guest, smiled. "I think it's a brilliant idea. The world needs more programs like this. And if anyone can make it happen, it's Ethan." The board voted unanimously to pursue the initiative's global expansion, setting the stage for an entirely new chapter. Amid the professional milestones, Ethan found himself reflecting on his personal life. For years, he had been so focused on his career that relationships and friendships had often taken a backseat. Now, with his growing role in Avalon Lift, he realized how much he valued connection, not just with his colleagues, but also with the people who had become part of his journey. One weekend, Ethan attended a reunion for the participants of the original Ridgeview Center. Gerald was there, now thriving as a supervisor at his factory. Tanya had expanded her catering business and was employing others from the program. Carla, the activist from Harbor City, had become a regional coordinator for Avalon Lift. As Ethan spoke with them, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. These weren't just success stories, they were proof that compassion could spark lasting change. "It all started with you," Tanya said, smiling. "If you hadn't believed in us, none of this would have been possible." Ethan shook his head. "It started with all of us. You did the hard work. I just opened the door." As Ethan continued to grow the initiative, he found himself reconnecting with an old friend, Amelia, his sister. She had been a quiet source of support during the early days of the program. But their busy lives had often kept them from spending time together. Now, Amelia invited Ethan to join her at a charity event she was organizing for young entrepreneurs. At the event, Ethan met Lila, a dynamic entrepreneur who ran a nonprofit focused on education in underserved communities. Lila's passion and energy reminded Ethan of his early days with Avalon Lift. They struck up a conversation that quickly turned into a deep connection. "You're doing incredible work," Lila said, her eyes shining with admiration. "The world needs more people like you." Ethan smiled. "I could say the same about you." As the weeks went by, their conversations turned into dinners, and dinners into something more. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future that included not just his work, but also love and companionship. As Avalon Lift expanded internationally, Ethan faced new challenges. In one country, political instability made it difficult to establish partnerships. In another, cultural differences required significant adjustments to the program's approach. Ethan leaned heavily on local leaders, trusting their expertise to guide the initiative. During a visit to a pilot center in South America, Ethan met Diego, a young man who had been living on the streets after losing his family in a natural disaster. Through Avalon Lift, Diego had learned carpentry and was now teaching others the trade. "This place saved my life," Diego told Ethan, his voice filled with emotion. "And now I want to help others the way you helped me." Ethan felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Diego's story was a reminder of why the work mattered, even when it was hard. As the global initiative gained traction, Elizabeth announced her decision to retire from public life. She and Victor planned to focus on rebuilding their relationship and exploring new ways to give back quietly. At a small farewell gathering, Elizabeth pulled Ethan aside. "You've carried this torch further than I ever imagined," she said, "and you've inspired me in ways I can't even begin to explain." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You're the heart of this program." Elizabeth smiled, her eyes misty. "The heart belongs to everyone who's been a part of it. Keep going, Ethan. The world needs you." Years passed, and Avalon Lift became a global force for change. Ethan, now a seasoned leader, continued to champion the power of compassion and opportunity. The initiative had helped thousands find stability, hope, and purpose. Ethan's relationship with Lila flourished, bringing balance and joy to his life. Together, they envisioned new ways to integrate education and opportunity, blending their passions into a shared mission. On the 10-year anniversary of Avalon Lift, Ethan stood on stage at a massive celebration in Ridgeview. The crowd included participants, employees, and supporters from around the world. As he looked out at the sea of faces, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. "This program began with a simple act of kindness," Ethan said, his voice steady, "and it's grown into something far greater than any of us could have imagined. But the work isn't done. There are still lives to touch, hands to hold, and doors to open. Let's keep going, together." The applause was deafening, but Ethan's heart was calm. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter on the streets of Ridgeview had become a movement that spanned the globe. And while the road ahead was long, Ethan was ready to keep walking it, one step at a time.